crisis that never made headlines. There was no single morning when markets collapsed, no dramatic ticker plunging across screens, no urgent speeches delivered in emergency tones. Yet something broke anyway, quietly and methodically, without ever announcing itself as a crisis. And because it stayed invisible, its consequences were allowed to spread. To understand why certain moments in American banking reshaped everything without ever becoming public disasters, we need to examine how systems fail when intervention prevents visibility, because the most dangerous breakdowns are often the ones that never look like breakdowns at all. In this case, stress did not arrive as panic. It arrived as pressure that was repeatedly absorbed before it could surface. Small failures were contained. Losses were rerouted. Confidence was preserved just long enough to avoid headlines. At the institutional level, warning signs appeared early. Funding costs shifted subtly. Liquidity became less predictable. Counterparties grew cautious without explaining why. But none of this looked like crisis. Markets remained open. Payments cleared. Balance sheets still met requirements. From the outside, everything functioned. That was a problem. The system had learned how to keep operating while under strain. Intervention smoothed disruptions before they registered as events. Stability muted the signals that normally force attention. Inside banks, behavior began to change. Risk committees met more frequently. Hedging increased. Exposure was adjusted quietly rather than publicly reduced. These moves were defensive, not reckless, but they revealed something important. Institutions were reacting to stress they could feel, even though nothing officially appeared wrong. At the same time, policymakers monitored conditions closely. They saw the same pressures. They recognized the same fragility, and they responded early, deliberately, and quietly. Facilities were adjusted. Liquidity channels expanded. Reassurance flowed through back channels rather than announcements. The goal was containment, not correction. This approach worked. Markets stayed calm. Confidence held. And because nothing dramatic happened, attention moved elsewhere, but stability came at a cost. Each hidden intervention prevented learning. Each absorbed shock removed accountability. Each avoided headline postponed adjustment. The system survived the moment, but it did not resolve it. Instead, it carried the pressure forward, compressed and redistributed, waiting for a time when it could no longer remain unseen. This was a crisis without spectacle, and that made it far more dangerous. As the pressure continued without public recognition, the system adapted in subtle but consequential ways that few outside banking circles could see. What would normally trigger debate, reform, or restraint instead became routine adjustment. Stress was normalized rather than resolved. Banks began treating instability as a background condition, not something to confront directly, but something to manage continuously. Liquidity planning assumed disruption. Risk models incorporated permanent tension. This changed internal priorities. Preserving confidence mattered more than correcting imbalance. Short-term stability outweighed long-term resilience. Problems were deferred rather than addressed. Because there were no headlines, there was no urgency. Because there was no urgency, there was no accountability. Each institution acted defensively, but quietly. Each response looked prudent in isolation. Meanwhile, coordination increased. Information flowed through informal channels. Expectations aligned. Behavior converged without instruction. Markets reflected this calm. Prices remained stable. Volatility stayed low. Signals that once warned of fragility were muted. But beneath that surface, capacity was shrinking. Buffers were being used, not rebuilt. Flexibility was declining. Margin for error narrowed with every intervention. The absence of visible crisis also distorted perception. Observers concluded the system was resilient. Past stress seemed well managed. Confidence deepened precisely when vulnerability grew. Regulators faced a dilemma: expose the strain and risk panic, or contain it quietly and preserve calm. They chose containment. That choice carried consequences. By preventing disruption, the system avoided correction. By avoiding correction, imbalance persisted. And by persisting, it became structural. Over time, this invisible crisis reshaped expectations. Markets learned that stress would be managed. Banks learned that pressure could be absorbed. Everyone learned that nothing dramatic would happen. This was the early conflict, a system surviving without learning, adapting without healing, stabilizing without strengthening. And that conflict was accumulating quietly, waiting for a moment when invisibility would no longer be possible. The conflict deepened when the system realized that avoiding visible crisis did not mean avoiding damage, but merely changing where that damage accumulated and how difficult it would be to unwind later. By smoothing every disruption before it could fully surface, the system had begun trapping stress inside its own architecture. Banks felt this first, not through collapse, but through constraint. Liquidity that once felt flexible became reserved. Risk budgets tightened. Optionality slowly disappeared. Institutions were still functioning, but with less room to maneuver. Every balance sheet adjustment carried more consequence. Every decision assumed less margin for error. Because stress had never been released publicly, it had never been resolved. Buffers were consumed quietly. Extra capacity became permanent usage. What was meant for emergencies became standard operating space. This created a dangerous asymmetry. The system looked calm from the outside, but felt tense from within. Confidence remained high, yet flexibility was fading. When new shocks appeared, even small ones, they interacted with unresolved pressure. Markets reacted faster. Liquidity hesitated sooner. Confidence required more reassurance to hold. Banks began anticipating intervention as part of normal functioning, not as an emergency response, but as a structural feature. Planning incorporated expected support. Risk tolerance adjusted accordingly. This further blurred responsibility. Individual institutions managed exposure, assuming collective stabilization would follow. No single decision looked dangerous, but together they reduced resilience. Regulators saw the accumulation clearly. They understood the trade-off, revealing strain risked destabilization. Concealing preserved order, but deepened dependency. Each choice narrowed future options. Each quiet fix reduced the system's ability to absorb the next one. The cost of transparency increased. The cost of silence compounded. This was the heart of the conflict, a system that could no longer afford to show stress because it had hidden too much of it already. A system stable only as long as nothing forced honesty. The crisis that never made headlines was no longer just an absence of spectacle. It had become a condition, one that made the system more sensitive, more reactive, and more fragile with every calm day that passed. The climax arrived quietly, as it always does in a crisis that never announces itself, not with panic, but with recognition among those closest to the system that something essential had been lost, the ability to reset. By preventing stress from becoming visible, the system had also prevented learning. Mistakes were absorbed before they could teach. Imbalances were softened before they could correct. Pain was postponed, not eliminated. Stability had done its job too well. It preserved confidence, but at the cost of resilience. It kept markets open, but narrowed the paths forward. The system was no longer fragile in the traditional sense. It did not teeter on the edge of collapse. Instead, it became rigid, dependent, sensitive to disruption because it could no longer release pressure naturally. This was the real damage, not failure, but the loss of elasticity. Not collapse, but the inability to bend without assistance. Every quiet intervention made the next one more necessary. Every avoided headline raised the cost of future honesty. The system learned how to survive stress, but forgot how to recover from it. The resolution is not about seeking crisis. It is about allowing visibility, about letting signals travel far enough to matter, about accepting discomfort before it becomes dependency. American banking still carries the imprint of this invisible moment, a period when calm was preserved at all costs, and adjustment was deferred indefinitely. The next disruption will not start from zero. It will arrive on top of unresolved pressure, and whether it becomes visible will depend less on its size and more on how much flexibility remains. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.